Have you ever stepped into a place so heavy with silence that even your heartbeat sounded too loud? That's what Clara Whitmore felt the moment she arrived at Silver Creek Ranch. The land stretched wide and tired under a clouded Georgia sky, the fields long abandoned, the grass overgrown and brown. A mist hung low over the pastures, swirling between splintered fence posts and the crumbling barns, wrapping everything in a heavy, uneasy stillness. The house itself, a grand but decaying southern manor, stood at the heart of the ranch. Its white paint peeled like shedding skin. The windows, dark and lifeless, watched Clara like a jury, waiting for her to make a mistake. She clutched her small travel bag tighter and took a deep breath. Her assignment had been vague: private care for an incapacitated patient, immediate need, discretion required. It paid enough to cover her nursing school debts twice over. But standing there, she wondered if any money was worth the feeling tightening around her chest. The iron gate creaked open on its own as she pushed it. Her boots crunched over the gravel path as she made her way to the front porch. Before she could knock, the heavy oak door swung inward. An older man in a battered work jacket stood in the shadows, hat pulled low over sharp grey eyes. "You Clara?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady despite the way her skin prickled. "Malcolm Hayes. I'm foreman here. Miss Clarissa's waiting." Without another word, he turned and walked down the hall. Clara hesitated just a moment before following. The air inside the house smelled like old wood, damp earth, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sour, like forgotten blood. Her footsteps echoed against faded rugs and high ceilings. Portraits of unsmiling ancestors lined the walls, their eyes tracking her as she passed. At the far end of the hall, Malcolm opened a door and stepped aside. "He's in there." Clara crossed the threshold and froze. The room was freezing cold, the curtains drawn tight against the dim, overcast light. In the center of the room, on a grand four-poster bed, lay a man as still as stone, Edward Callahan. She recognized him immediately from the photo attached to the assignment letter, a man once full of life, now reduced to this. Skin pale against the dark wood of the bed, muscles slack, breathing shallow but steady. He wasn't old, early 30s maybe, but there was something ancient about the stillness that hung over him, as if whatever had claimed him wasn't just illness. Clara set her bag down carefully and moved to his side. She checked his pulse, strong, but unnaturally slow. She noted the IV drip, the feeding tube, standard care for a comatose patient, but there were details that made her gut twist: small, faded bruises on his wrists, marks around his ankles under the blanket, signs not of sickness, but of restraint. She glanced back at Malcolm, who lingered in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "What happened to him?" she asked. Malcolm shrugged. "Some say fever, some say worse. And his sister? You'll meet Miss Clarissa soon enough," he said, almost a warning. "She's the one that pays you." Clara nodded slowly, mind racing. Something wasn't right here. This wasn't just sickness. This was control, suppression, something deeper and darker. As Malcolm left, pulling the door shut behind him, Clara sat beside Edward and placed her hand gently over his. "I'm here to help you," she whispered. In the dim light, she could almost swear his fingers twitched. Outside, the heavy mist thickened, pressing against the windows, as if the house itself was trying to keep its secrets buried. But Clara had no intention of looking the other way. Not this time. The heavy knock came just as Clara finished checking Edward's IV line for the third time. Before she could answer, the door opened, and in swept Clarissa Callahan. She was everything the house was not. Sleek, polished, pristine. Dressed in a tailored black dress, her platinum blonde hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, she looked more like a senator's wife than a ranch owner. "You must be Clara," Clarissa said, her voice a low, syrupy drawl that barely masked its edge. "I hope Malcolm hasn't scared you off yet." Clara stood and extended her hand. "Miss Callahan, it's an honor to—" Clarissa waved off the handshake as if swatting a fly. "Spare me the formalities. You're here to do a job, nothing more." She walked around Edward's bed slowly, her sharp heels clicking against the wooden floorboards, each step measured like a queen inspecting her court. "My brother," Clarissa said, pausing to adjust the blanket at his feet with a delicate hand, "is very fragile. He must not be agitated. No sudden movements, no unnecessary talking, no visitors." "Of course," Clara said, heart hammering. Clarissa's gaze snapped to hers, pinning her like a butterfly to a board. "And remember," she said, her voice dipping lower, "he belongs to this house, to this land. And what's good for Silver Creek is good for him." Something about the way she said it made Clara's skin crawl. "Shouldn't he be moved to a hospital?" Clara asked carefully. "He needs specialized care." "No hospitals," Clarissa cut in sharply. "They wouldn't understand." Understand what? Clara wanted to ask, but something told her now was not the time. Clarissa straightened and smoothed her skirt. "Breakfast is at 7 sharp. You will be presentable. We do not tolerate lateness. Malcolm will show you your quarters." And with that, she turned and glided from the room, leaving behind a faint trail of cold perfume and the sinking certainty that Clara had just met the true warden of Silver Creek. Clara's room was tucked in the back corner of the house, small and sparsely furnished, with a narrow bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a desk. The window overlooked the overgrown fields stretching endlessly toward the tree line. Beyond it, the mist moved like a living thing, twisting between the trees in slow, deliberate tendrils. She unpacked quickly. There wasn't much. A few sets of scrubs, basic toiletries, a worn journal her grandmother had given her. She placed the journal on the nightstand, its cracked leather cover a small reminder of who she was before she stepped into this strange, heavy world. As night fell, the house grew eerily quiet. No creaking floors, no whispered conversations. Just silence, thick and stifling. Clara couldn't sleep. At around midnight she got up, pulled on a sweater, and crept into the hallway. The old house sighed under her weight, but no one stirred. She made her way back toward Edward's room. The door was ajar. Inside, the lamp she had left on had been turned off. In the darkness, Edward lay motionless as before. But Clara noticed something else, a faint scent in the air, sweet, sharp, unnatural. She moved closer. That's when she saw it. Tucked under the bed, barely visible in the sliver of moonlight, a small bundle wrapped in red cloth. Feathers, bones, twisted roots tied with black string. A hex bag. A shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't just illness. This was something ancient, something intentional. Before she could investigate further, a soft sound made her turn. Standing in the hallway, half shrouded by shadow, was Ben Turner, the old groundskeeper. His face, lined and tired, held no malice, only sadness. "You saw it, didn't you?" he whispered. Clara nodded, unable to find her voice. "You be careful, Miss Whitmore," he said, voice low as a prayer. "Round here, not every sickness can be healed by medicine." And then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Clara trembling in the doorway, the cursed object still hidden in the gloom behind her. Something evil had its claws deep into Silver Creek, and she had just stepped right into its teeth. Morning came, but it brought no warmth. The mist still clung to the ranch like a shroud, and the house seemed even more hollow than the night before. At breakfast, Clara sat stiffly at the long wooden table while Miss Cora, the cook, ladled out plates of grits and ham. Malcolm sat silently across from her, barely touching his food. Clarissa presided at the head of the table, composed and cold, her presence pressing down like a lead blanket. No one spoke. Clara stole glances at Malcolm and Miss Cora, hoping for a hint of normalcy, but both kept their eyes low, their faces tight. When the meal ended, Clarissa rose gracefully. "Mr. Hayes will show you the household rules," she said crisply to Clara. "You'll find we value tradition above all else at Silver Creek." Clara followed Malcolm out to the porch. He stood for a moment, staring out over the fields. "You saw the bag," he said without turning. Clara didn't answer. "That ain't the first one," he added. "Won't be the last, neither." "What is it?" Clara asked, voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm sighed. "Old magic. Hoodoo, some call it. Root work." "But why?" she pressed. "Why would anyone—" He turned to face her, his expression grave. "Clarissa doesn't want him waking up." The words hit Clara like a blow. She had suspected. Deep down she had known. But hearing it out loud rooted fear deep into her bones. "If Edward wakes," Malcolm continued, "everything she's built, the money, the land, the power, it all slips away. He's the rightful heir. She's just a caretaker, till he dies." Clara's mind raced. "But he's alive," she said. "There's still time." "You can't save him alone," Malcolm said, voice low. "And Clarissa's watching." He looked over his shoulder toward the house. "She's always watching." That afternoon, Clara slipped into town under the pretense of running errands. Silver Creek wasn't far from Sweetwater, a dusty little town with one gas station, a diner, and a church with a broken bell. Clara parked at the diner, pretending to browse the bulletin board outside, but really watching the comings and goings. She needed help. She needed someone who knew more about the kind of evil she was up against. And that's when she remembered the old stories. The whispered name passed around in the town's darker corners: Miss Agnes, an herbalist, a root worker, a healer feared by some, revered by others. Locals said she lived beyond the marsh, near the cypress woods, where the ground was soft and the trees bent low with age. Clara made up her mind. That evening, after dinner, after Clarissa retired to her study with a glass of bourbon and her heavy ledger, Clara slipped out the back door. The path through the woods was narrow, lit only by a sliver of moon and the dim glow of fireflies. The deeper she walked, the thicker the air became, heavy with the scent of moss and damp earth. Finally, she saw it, a cabin tucked between two ancient trees, smoke curling from the chimney. Clara knocked. The door creaked open, and there stood Miss Agnes, small, wiry, with silver hair plaited into a thick braid and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I was wondering when you'd come," the old woman said. "You know why I'm here?" Clara asked, breathless. Miss Agnes smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Child," she said, stepping aside to let her in, "ain't nothing that happens at Silver Creek that the land don't whisper about." Inside, the cabin was filled with the scent of herbs and old wood. Dried flowers hung from the rafters. Glass jars lined the shelves, each filled with roots, powders, bones. Clara sat at the rough kitchen table, heart pounding. "I need to wake him," she said, "before it's too late." Miss Agnes nodded solemnly. "You'll need more than prayers, honey," she said. "You'll need to break the binding. You'll need faith and fire." Clara left Miss Agnes's cabin just before midnight, clutching a small satchel filled with the tools she would need. Crushed herbs, blessed salt, a charm stitched from red cloth and white thread, and a thin vial of something dark and pungent. "Break the circle," Miss Agnes had warned, "but beware, evil roots deep." The walk back to Silver Creek felt longer, heavier, as if the woods themselves were trying to hold her back. The mist swirled thick around her legs, and every snapping twig sent a shiver down her spine. When she finally reached the ranch, she paused at the tree line, heart hammering. The house sat in the distance, lights still glowing in the windows like watching eyes. It was now or never. Clara crept around the side of the house, clutching the satchel to her chest. Malcolm was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Ben. The ranch was silent, except for the distant hoot of an owl and the creak of the porch swing twisting in the wind. She slipped through the back door and made her way to Edward's room. Inside, the air was colder than ever. The heavy drapes fluttered slightly, though the windows were closed. A low, almost imperceptible hum filled the room, a sound not made by anything mechanical. Clara moved quickly. She pulled the charm from the satchel and sprinkled the blessed salt around the bed, forming a broken circle, just as Miss Agnes had instructed. Then she placed the red cloth bundle beneath Edward's pillow. "Come back," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Fight your way back." As she uncorked the vial, the thick, bitter smell of burnt herbs filled the room. That's when she heard it, the creak of the floorboards behind her. She turned. Clarissa stood in the doorway, dressed in a flowing black robe, her eyes gleaming with something sharp and feral. "You stupid girl," Clarissa hissed. "You think you can undo what's been done?" Clara backed up instinctively, bumping against the bed. "He belongs to this land," Clarissa snarled, stepping closer. "He's nothing without it, and neither are you." "No," Clara said, voice rising. "You're the one who's nothing without control." Clarissa lunged, but Clara threw the vial at her feet. A burst of blinding smoke filled the room, thick and acrid. Clarissa shrieked and stumbled back, clawing at her throat. Clara grabbed Edward's hand, squeezed it tightly. "Wake up," she begged. "Please, wake up." And in the choking smoke, she felt it, the faintest squeeze of his fingers. The ranch erupted into chaos. Clarissa's screams echoed down the halls as Malcolm and Miss Cora came running. Ben burst through the front door with a shotgun in hand, fear and fury on his face. Clara barely registered them. She was too focused on Edward. His eyelids fluttered. Then, with a ragged gasp, he opened his eyes, pale, confused, but alive. "Edward," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now." He stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Then his hand tightened around hers. Clarissa tried to lunge again, but Malcolm caught her mid-stride, wrenching her arms behind her back. "You're done, Clarissa," he said grimly. "You fools," she screamed. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." Miss Cora crossed herself, whispering a prayer under her breath. Ben leveled the shotgun at Clarissa. "You hurt this land enough, girl. Time you answer for it." The sheriff arrived not long after, summoned by Miss Agnes herself, who stood at the edge of the porch with her arms crossed, watching the whole thing unfold like she'd seen it coming all along. Clarissa was dragged away, cursing and spitting, her voice growing smaller and smaller as the mist swallowed her whole. Inside, Clara stayed by Edward's side. He drifted in and out of consciousness, weak from months of forced slumber. But each time he opened his eyes and saw her, a little more color returned to his face. The curse was broken, but the scars it left behind would take longer to heal. Clara knew one thing for certain. She hadn't just saved Edward. She had saved herself too. Weeks passed. The mist that once clung to Silver Creek Ranch began to lift, both from the fields and from the hearts inside the house. Sunlight broke through the heavy clouds more often now, warming the soil, coaxing life back into the land. Edward's recovery was slow, but steady. Each day Clara helped him relearn simple things, holding a cup, standing without support, speaking without his voice breaking. She stayed patient, never rushing him, celebrating every small victory as if it were a miracle. And in many ways it was. They often sat together on the wide front porch, rocking side by side in battered old chairs, watching the fields breathe again. Malcolm and Ben worked the fences. Miss Cora baked pies that filled the house with the smell of cinnamon and hope. Clarissa was gone, awaiting trial in the county jail. Her absence hung in the air like a wound that would scar but not kill. One evening, as the sky turned molten gold, Edward turned to Clara. "You could leave now, you know," he said quietly. "You've done more than anyone could ask." Clara smiled softly. "I could. But you're still here," he said, a question hidden inside the words. She looked out at the fields, the barn, the trees. This broken, stubborn land had nearly consumed her, and yet somehow it had also healed her. "I'm still here," she said simply. Edward reached out, tentative, and covered her hand with his. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't have to. Spring came to Silver Creek Ranch. Wildflowers spread across the fields like spilled paint. The fences gleamed with fresh whitewash. A new foal kicked up its heels in the pasture, and inside the house, life began anew. Edward, walking with only a slight limp now, took back the reins of the ranch. restoring order, forgiving old debts, rebuilding bridges his sister had tried to burn. He didn't just want to reclaim the land, he wanted to make it better than it had ever been. And Clara was part of that future. She officially moved into a small cottage behind the main house, once used for hired hands. With her nursing skills and her stubborn heart, she became more than caretaker. She became family. Late one afternoon, after mending a broken fence together, Edward and Clara sat beneath the ancient oak that overlooked the ranch. He pulled a small, worn box from his jacket pocket. Clara's breath caught. It wasn't a grand, polished ring. It wasn't wrapped in velvet or tied with a bow. It was simple, honest, real, like everything they had fought for. "I don't have fancy words," Edward said. "Just this. I don't want to rebuild this place without you. Will you stay?" Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, not from sadness, but from knowing, deep in her bones, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I was never just passing through," she whispered. She slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. They sat there as the sun dipped low, painting the ranch in fire and gold, the air thick with the smell of earth and new beginnings. And somewhere beyond the fields, past the trees, past the ghosts that once haunted them, Silver Creek Ranch exhaled. Alive, free, home. The end.